Timmy's and hockey, syrup and bacon, Molson and Mounties at your can stations, throwing on some cheese and gravy on top of our fries. That's a poutine. And we wear our plaid sweaters when we walk amongst the northern lights. Rockies and prairies, oceans and lakes, other than winter, all the seasons are great. Brushing off the snow a little longer than we'd like. But you won't hear us complaining, 'cause that just wouldn't be polite. No, man. 'Cause up here in Canada, the air's clear, the weather's adequate, we all cheer. We're pretty passionate, and everybody has a pet, polar bear, and a moose. Yeah, up here in Canada. Celsius kilometers, prime ministers and provinces. We maybe say it different, but we always keep our promises. We said we'd win the gold back in 2010, and we did. But because we're so nice, we'll let you win every now and again. But not too much. 'Cause up here in Canada, we like beards. We think they're fabulous. We don't fear if people laugh at us for wearing 6 pairs of long underwear. Yeah, up here in Canada. Basketball, telephones, wonder balls and hockey, snowmobiles, ketchup chips, and even walkie-talkies. Peanut butter, garbage bags, the mighty foghorn. Just a few things that you can thank us for. Shatner, Carey, Myers, Gosling, Reynolds, and Reeves. Candy Short, Michael J, and all of Schitt's Creek. Celine, Shania, Adams, Bieber, Bublé, and Drake. We're sorry about Nickelback, yeah, that was a mistake. We're sorry. We're sorry. Yeah, we're sorry, eh? We're so sorry. 'Cause up here in Canada, we like beer and our cannabis. And each year, we all get taxed a bunch, but everybody gets free health care. And a goose. Yeah, up here in Canada.
Debate.
Okay.
We're good.
Yes. Well, this is going to be a survey of 6 areas, not in depth on any one of them, but a strict survey across. And when it comes to people who really know what's in there, I'll give you the reference for it. What I'm going to do is start here in the Niagara region and then go across through a small spot, DeWitt's Corners, the Francois Quarry in Montreal, antimony in Southam, evaporites in Sussex, New Brunswick, and of course, Parsborough over here. But we'll start in Ontario. If you take a stack of rock formations, push them over, plane them flat, you wind up with the rock formations of Southern Ontario. And the ones we're interested in are right smack here at the intersection of the Silurian and the Ordovician, which is about here. This is the map of the west end of Lake Ontario. Toronto's up here. The city of Hamilton, Burlington's down here, and Niagara Falls is over on the corner. And if you look at this orangey stripe, that's pretty much where the Silurian starts, heading to the west. And I'd like to draw your attention to a couple of names: Thorold here, Beamsville there, and Dundas up here. From Dundas to Thorold's about 63 kilometers. And the whole point of the talk, all these red things are quarries, is that it doesn't matter where you dig, you get exactly the same minerals. Some of them are perhaps a little more prolific in one than the other. Some of them may have a different color. There are variations, but if you happen to have a house anywhere along that line and you dug in your backyard, you'd come up with exactly the same minerals. It's all flat-lying dolomitic stone. And as you can see here from the Lincoln Quarry in Beamsville, flat-lying dolomite. If you go up to Dundas Quarry, which is 40 kilometers further away, you wind up with flat-lying dolostone. Same stuff. So what do you find? Barite in Beamsville, interesting stuff. And a little change in the habit, so you get straws from there as well. By the way, none of these pictures are stacked. I had to take them 20 years ago on behalf of a gentleman who was being inducted into the Micromounters Hall of Fame and had no camera. And he promptly died shortly thereafter. So his specimens vanished, and that's it. As far as I'm concerned, they're gone. They're somewhere, but they're gone from me, so I couldn't re-photograph. Up at Dundas End, Celestine. Nice looking stuff. And a different habit from the same quarry. You can also get blue Celestine from Dundas. This one is dolomite, and you say, well, yes, it's dolomite, and it's crummy looking dolomite, but it's actually a pseudomorph, and it's a pseudomorph after coral. And all of these little bits here are corallites, or used to be corallites. And the spaces between them are where the water was directed down to the living coral animals below the upper layer. So, yep, it's crummy dolomite, but it's a pseudomorph. You can get nice fluorite anywhere you dig. This one came from Montrose, which is way up at the north end of the area. Galena is also scattered throughout, but the crystals are very small. This is way less than a millimeter, which is why you see that it's got little colored speckles on it, because the diaphragm on the camera had to be closed down so far, we started getting diffraction problems. Thorold has gypsum, and there's actually a gypsum quarry in the north end of this range. So it's available, and it's sometimes viable for commercial reasons. Sorry, going backwards here. There's more gypsum from the same area. Also, classic marcasite and saddle dolomite all over. Some of it has some rather interesting habits for marcasite. In fact, you can get dumbbells. And the pyrite end, that's a very cute pyrite right there. I've never seen another one like it, and probably never again, because as far as I know, it's gone. Sphalerite from Montrose, which is far to the north, and Beamsville, which is down further to the south. The only difference between these two is basically the color of the sphalerite. And it varies, because in the middle at places like the Steatley Quarry in Dundas, it can be black sphalerite. Or spectacular twisted sphalerite. This one, the last section of this little bit, always gets to me. This isn't even from Ontario. This is from New York, across the border at Niagara Falls. Dolomite on sphalerite. That thing is 4.5 millimeters long. And it's been sitting out there for Lord knows how many million years. It has survived the blast in the quarry. It has survived trimming to get it to fit a Micromount box. And it has survived a 700-kilometer trip up to my place to get photographed, and an 800-kilometer trip down to the States, to Baltimore, to get the guy inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it's still hanging out there in space. Well, let's look at chapter 2. Chapter 2 is a small pit, which is deep in the Precambrian in Ontario. It's mentioned in Dana's Mineralogy in the 7th edition. And you might ask yourself, why? And that's quite complicated, actually. It's famous for pseudomorphs of corundum after spinel. It looks like a spinel, but it's a corundum. I, however, went there and I found little corundum, but I also found hugmomite. And I have to mention right at the start that it's actually magnesiohugmomite. It's just too complicated to keep saying that. And there are 4 different types of magnesiohugmomite. And the formula I've given up top is for the one that's trigonal. There are 3 hexagonal forms and 1 trigonal. That's the trigonal one. But I have no idea which is going to be found in this quarry. If you're interested in this stuff, Dr. Ina Likova at the Canadian Museum of Nature is working on it as we speak, and will be publishing shortly on the occurrence of magnesiohugmomite and other things in this particular locality. And by the way, for anybody who wants to complain about me wearing rubber boots in a quarry, those have steel toes and steel sole plates. And the reason I'm wearing them is that all of this stuff behind me here is water. The pit fills up in the spring when things melt. Now, the pit itself is in a farmer's field, plain old farmer's field near Perth, Ontario, which is about an hour west of Ottawa. And if you want to get into it, you have to go through prickly ash. There shouldn't be any prickly ash here. Prickly ash is a southern plant. It should be in Georgia or South Carolina. It shouldn't make it as far north as Ontario and Canada. But here's this stuff here, and boy, is it prickly. But once you've fought through it, you wound up in this little pit. You got your magnesiohugmomite, spinel, and pseudomorphs of corundum. The calcite of the Ottawa Valley, and there's quite a lot of it in the Ottawa Valley, is typically pink. It's one of the ways we recognize it. And you've also got some of the pyroboles scattered throughout the pink stuff as well. It's surface weathered. It's not deeply blocked, great chunks. So you can get it out with a hammer and chisel. And you come up with pseudomorphs of the corundum after spinel. The trigonal species just don't fit isometric system very well, but there they are. Sometimes they don't make it all the way. So here you've got what used to be a spinel fighting to remain so, and the corundum is slowly taking over. Well, not anymore because I've got it, but it was fighting to take over. When it does take over, sometimes it's green. I don't know whether that's an intrinsic color to the corundum at this area or whether it's contamination from some of the chlorophyll that's floating around in the area, but it's green. Here we come to the magnesiohugmomite. And once again, that's the trigonal formula, but I have no idea whether that's a trigonal crystal or not. And the pink calcite. And notice that the hugmomite is almost always associated with a spinel, and there's a spinel buried there in the calcite underneath. Most of the time, it sits on the spinel, sometimes in the spinel. But if it's on the spinel, it's always associated with the proper crystallographic axis of the spinel. And sometimes the spinels don't know what the axis is because they're mostly rounded. But the hugmomite knows. There's another one, and this one looks trigonal, but it's half buried in the calcite. So you can't really tell. It may just be hiding its full hexagonal shape inside. You can identify the hugmomite on black shiny spinel are the striations here. It looks like little books of mica. Now this one's rather interesting because the spinel over here has no faces. It doesn't know what its crystallographic axes are. But these two hugblumite crystals do. Because if you run a couple of lines through, that looks like about a 60-degree angle, which is what you'd expect from an isometric mineral. And if you throw in an equilateral triangle, that's 60 degrees. So the hugblumite knows what's going on, even if the spinel's forgotten. One of the tricky parts is the spinel changes. It gets pseudomorphed over to corundum, but the hugblumite doesn't. The hugblumite stays as it is. And there, the spinel has lost the battle, but the hugblumite is still there, bright and shiny. And it is shiny. That's one of the characteristics of the hugblumite. Always associated with spinel, but nice, bright and shiny on its own. I have no idea whether that one's hexagonal or trigonal. And some of them taper, just like micas. And once again, there's the spinel. It's sitting on spinel, and there's spinel buried behind it in the calcite. And that takes us on to chapter 3. We've been through the Silurian, we've been through the Precambrian. Let's have a look at a couple of things. Chapter 3 is where the Cretaceous meets the Ordovician. And that's the Francois Quarry in Montreal. Now, I said, I'm giving a survey, not in depth. If you want an in-depth story about this quarry, you go to the Mineralogical Record, the March-April issue of 2006. There's a very long article in there about this quarry written by Dr. Peter Tarasov and Les Horvath. And it is really in depth about this quarry. Anyway, what you're looking at there is flat-lying Ordovician rock, limestone, mudstone, whatever. But in that rock are these gray sills. And that is where we find the interesting things. It was originally called silicocarbonatite, but now they've classed it as carbonatized phonolite, which is kind of an odd way of putting things. It's about 120 million years old. And that puts it roughly the same age as Mont Saint-Hilaire. Now, there is one thing. The sills are not widely spread throughout the Montreal area. There are other quarries within 700, 800 meters that do not have these sills when you bore down through that level. Collecting, there's the sill up high. So unless you're really adventurous, and some people have been, I'm not, you collect among what's fallen down at the bottom. And if you're really good at noticing things, you might notice that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 collectors collecting in that melange down there. And it's tough collecting. It's tough collecting because it's very, very hard. This is a block that's come down. I was working once on a block that had come out, a large block. It had fallen down, so it was standing upright, and it may have been 8 feet high. I wanted something that was up here. And I climbed on a boulder, took my 8-pound sledgehammer, and made a wild overhead swing that hit the rock about here. And the coefficient of restitution of that stuff is such that a couple of minutes later, a couple of seconds later, I was lying flat on my back in the quarry floor because the rebound took me holding on to my hammer right off my boulder and flat on the floor of the quarry. It is incredibly hard, which is a problem because the willogonite, which is what we're looking for in these mirror-lytic cavities, is incredibly fragile. And that's what it looks like. Willogonite, named after Sir William E. Logan, founding director of the Geological Survey of Canada. It's mostly, what would one say? It looks hexagonal. It's actually triclinic. And I don't know what this stuff is. It could be gibbsite. It could be doylite. I have not seen it actually named anywhere. Maybe just plain aluminium hydroxide. Sometimes you get a yellow form in the willogonite. But as you can see, conditions must have changed fairly rapidly because these things change as they grew, have changed in shape on the way up. This one is a little fuzzy because I was trying to get a picture of the inclusion, and I still have no idea what that inclusion is. Now, you get other minerals. Barite, frequent accessory mineral. And if you look at it, it looks very much like the barite we saw in the Silurian back in Ontario. But there is one difference, because if you look a little further around in the vugs, you get barite that looks like that. Chisel tipped, but with faces that are absolutely clear of the coating on the others. And I must admit once more, I have no idea what that coating is, and I have not found anybody else who has written it out. Lots of little pyrite crystals, yes, bit of marcasite, but yeah, who knows? The interesting thing, or the other interesting thing, is dawsonite, which was named after Sir John William Dawson, the principal of McGill University in Montreal. It was discovered while they were digging foundations for the university, for the campus, which is why it's named after him. You see here, there's the crystal, and it's so clear that only the edges are showing. That's what it usually looks like, Frank-on-Quarry dawsonite. Tall, prismatic, with a flat termination right here. This may be something like an alcime because it probably formed from an alcime way back when. But it's nice, makes very nice, quiet, quick micromounts. Very hard to take pictures of, but good stuff. Unless it happens to have formed in the limestone. If it's in the phonolite, then it's tall and prismatic. If it's in the limestone, it's short and tabular. Still got striations on the side, still got the same forms at the ends, but tabular crystals rather than tall ones. This is calcite here, but that's in the limestone, not in the phonolite. Dresserite. Dresserite is a common accessory. It derives from hydrodresserite, which is also the type locality in this quarry. And the problem is you can't tell by eye whether it's hydrodresserite or dresserite. As a matter of fact, this is the Frank-on-Quarry. Almost everything in it's white. This could also be daciardite because they look exactly the same. The one thing about dresserite is that it's very, very brilliant when it's broken open. It helps to identify it from the strontianite, which is also formed up in balls. Most of the strontianite is in sprays like this. But when it gets in the balls and it breaks, you have to use the shine to differentiate it from dresserite. Galena, nice octahedra, but very small. This is probably less than a millimeter. It's got little pyrite crystals hanging onto it. And marcasite. There's lots and lots and lots of marcasite in the Francois quarry. It's all over the place. And it's usually found in these bladed forms. But if you get one of the iridescent ones, you can get it in flagmen. The color showing up here, we're starting to get some fluorite in on the act. Now, back to the marcasite though. A lot of the quartz in the quarry, and there's plenty of quartz in the Francois, shows up as looking dirty. Some is dirty, some it's quarry dust, and some it's marlinite clay, but an awful lot of it is actually marcasite right here. This stuff is marcasite. There are marcasite crystals too here, but just crummy stuff that covers the quartz. And the quartz itself is remarkably interesting out of this quarry because it's almost always frosted, covered with marcasite and little pyrite, but with frosted crystal shapes. And not only that, they're frequently not standard quartz crystals. Take a look at that one, little sceptered thing. And it has some etching or frosting surfaces. It makes you wonder if, you notice it's sitting with fluorite, as is this one. If after the primary deposition of the quartz, there wasn't a little loose fluorite hanging around that etched the surfaces for us. There's a complicated one. Also etched, frosted, and in all sorts. I'd hate to have to try to figure out which face is which on that little cluster. How about that one? It's got frosted faces. It's clear inside. And it's got these very interesting rhombohedral terminations. That little bit here is not a chip. It's an old attach point from the vug that it was in. Some of the quartz, if you can get a clear one, has movable bubbles inside. Some of it's got coated with some sort of organic material. And when you come to the end, you wind up with a little thing called thorbastnazite, one of the rarer species, the white balls. Now, as I've said, this is a quick, over-the-top survey. It's nowhere near the complete listing of what's in this quarry. There's a lot more, but it's also a lot less easy to identify, particularly by eye, and particularly because so much of it is white and has only been found once or twice. If you happened to have been in the United States, 30, 40 years ago, and bought the book on minerals by Robert Rapp and Weber, you will find this, or a picture that looks like this, labeled dresserite. It's not dresserite, it's plain plagioclase feldspar, which lines an awful lot of the bugs in the Francois quarry. I gave the specimen to Weber to take pictures of, and he took pictures of the plagioclase and labeled it dresserite and published it. So just be careful on that particular part. In the Francois, sabinaite is mostly a white powder. There are very rarely small crystals, but it's usually a white powder. And I don't have a picture of sabinaite, but this is the Francois quarry, and that's San Sabina. So you can take your pick one way or the other. Which takes us on to chapter 4. Chapter 4 is somewhere in the Upper Cambrian or Lower Ordovician. It's in country that's been squeezed and twisted and stretched and bent. That's the country. Now, the Lac Nicolet antimony mine in South Ham, or Am Sud, if you happen to be French. For those of you who don't speak French, lac is just lake in French, and Am Sud is South Ham in French. And there's the lake over there. The quarry's over here. This is Montreal, the city of Montreal on the island. And the locality for South Ham is buried over here under the label. It's in the Appalachian Fold Belt. So as I said, it's been ripped and torn and twisted and shoved. And it came out a little bit like this. This is a rough sketch of the place about 1971. They'd taken away the overburden and exposed the lower adit entrance. And there's an upper shaft here and another one over this way, and a small drainage adit down here. Nowadays, overgrown again, the edges sort of look like that. And there's the vein on the hillside. Thick slab of quartz and native antimony right here. Now, I've got this going up. Actually, the slide should be reversed because it's pointing downhill. And there's the way it is. That picture was taken facing down that way. But here's the vein up and on through. And this is a crew from the Canadian Museum of Nature that blasted it in the late 1980s. You can't get into this place anymore, even if you did get permission from the owner, because the adit roof appears to have collapsed a little way in, and there are loose rocks everywhere. Jerry Van Veldhuizen here was the X-ray technician at the museum. He's dead now, but some of the identifications that I mentioned came from him. And there's Dr. George Robinson, who was then with the Canadian Museum of Nature, descending into the upper shaft. That's a brave man, especially since he's only hanging onto that rope. And down inside, antimony oxides on the mine walls. And you must say there's reddish powder all over this mine, this area. And that powder can be goethite or metastibnite or schwarzigkeit. If you haven't come across schwarzigkeit before, it's FeSb2O4. In other words, it's just a little addition on to the stibnite. A few oxygens here and there and a little bit of iron. And this is what they were looking for. Stibnite, SbS3. Some of it was up to 7 centimeters or more in the veins. But this little cluster here is only a couple of millimeters across, and it's with valentinite, which is this lath-like thing down at the bottom. We've got columnar stibnite, and then tight clusters of stibnite. This appears to be secondary growth on top of the old stuff. And it could be berthierite because they're impossible to tell apart by eye. That I've called stibnite, but once again, it could be berthierite. You'd have to use X-ray or some other means of identification to find out. So it comes in little clusters. It also comes in frogs. So if you happen to come across one of those while you're in the area, see if it croaks. That formed in a crack in one of the boulders in the mine. And if you take away one of the sulfur and put in one of the oxygens instead, that's what you get, kermesite. That's a change from stibnite here add an oxygen, and you've got kermesite there. Of course, this is kermesite on stibnite. You can also get stibnite on kermesite. There's one. That ball's about 1/10 of a millimeter across because the stibnite's not very big. Sorry, because the kermesite's not very big. Now that was dark red kermesite. You can also get fairly bright red. And it starts getting mixed up with yellow alteration products and a few other things like the valentinite that's coming in here. And eventually the alteration gets bigger and bigger, and stibicanite starts forming, adding a little bit of water, a little more oxygen. Finally, you wind up with a whole mess of mixed powdery oxides and hydroxides. And when you get to that stage, most collectors just refer to it as butter of antimony. Mind you, it's a butter you wouldn't want to taste, but it's interesting stuff all the same. The dimorph of valentinite, same formula, different shape, is cenermontite. Cenermontite is cubic, and it comes along in very fine little fellows like this. Unfortunately, I couldn't take another picture of that because these belong to the museum, Canadian Museum of Nature. And they've got them squirreled away in a drawer somewhere. But there they are, octahedra, very fine octahedra of cenermontite. And they're quite small because you can see the length of this kermesite crystal here. And kermesite's not all that big by itself. However, in the mine, there is more valentinite than there is cenermontite. And as you've seen on the way along, normally it's in gray laths like this, like these. And this is probably berthierite hanging on at the side. But sometimes it comes out in yellow laths. And once you've absorbed that and the other one, all of a sudden it gets wildly exuberant and comes out with an overgrowth, which is also valentinite. Now here you're looking down the C-axis of one crystal, and you've got all of these others spreading out from the side. In fact, if you look at it sideways, it spreads out like that. Doesn't look like valentinite at all, but it is oriented overgrowth. There's a lot of iron in the mine, as I said, which is why you've got goethite everywhere. But sometimes it joins up with what's left of the stibnite and becomes goodmandite, which very often forms nice twins, like those. Occasionally, though, it just overlaps a crystal of dolomite or something. And dolomite's not that common in this mine. So maybe that's why it's trying to throw it out or cover it over. Albite, you can get albite, sometimes in nice crystals with inclusions. But quartz, there's a lot of quartz in there. And the quartz, almost all of the quartz has inclusions of one kind or another. Metallic sulfides, obviously, but whether they're antimony sulfides or iron sulfides, I can't tell you. That looks like pyrrhotite in one of them. Finally, one of the things that you can find, you might find a gypsum. It's a very rare mineral in South Ham. As far as I know, I can say it's very rare because as far as I know, only 2 specimens have been found. I have this one, and the Canadian Museum of Nature has the other one. Now, for the folks who live in the United States, they might want to be very careful if they visited the Baltimore Symposium for a few years, because the Canadian Museum of Nature, very, very generous people, they gave me about 50 pounds of the stuff that they'd collected at the mine. And I took most of it down to Baltimore and said, hey guys, dig in. And they did. So this material, and some of it's really splendid with the kermesite, has been scattered all over the Northeast United States. And I also took some down to the Canadian Micromineral Association at St. Catharines. So it's been scattered through southern Canada as well. But it can be available. And if you've got some, look through it very carefully to see if you can find any gypsum. However, from there, let's go a lot further east to a place where you can't collect. Great stuff, but you can't collect there. And this time we were in the Carboniferous. Here's Prince Edward Island. Here's the Bay of Fundy. You go right up there, head off that way, you wind up in the Great Glen Fault in Scotland. So it's all the same thing. Mind you, all of that happened in the Devonian. We're here about the Carboniferous, which is right over there. And if you look at that area, Carboniferous material in here, a place called Sussex, there are 3 mines. Here's Sussex. There's the Penobscot mine, the Millstream mine, and the Clover Hill Potacan mine. And they all have different minerals, but they're all very closely related, because the Millstream, I'll drop out the Potacan for the time being, but the Millstream was an isolated inner basin in the old days. Penobscot was an open forebasin. So one of them kept getting replenished as it evaporated and the other one didn't. And they wound up with different things. For example, when you're looking for boron minerals, they got boron. Here's the Penobscot mine back in 1997. And as I said, you can't collect. There's a reason for that. It's not just grumpy people running a mine. It's the fact that that's what you collect from, the drill cores. And unless you've got real clout with the company, they don't want to give up their drill cores. They're in their library. But once again, the Canadian Museum of Nature, in the shape of Dr. Joel Grice, does have clout, and he got his hands on some. So he dissolved the drill cores, and that's what he got. Trembothite, congolite. These are rare boron minerals, and very pretty ones too. The colmanite's not so pretty, but hey, trembothite's nice, and it comes in a couple of different habits. Did I say trembothite? That's Hilgardite. Sorry. Oh well, it's one of those days. Hydroborosite. That's a nice double-ended crystal, doubly terminated. Penobscotite, meh. It's named after the mine. It's not all that pretty. Pringleite is, and it has a dimorph-Ritenbergite. They're both very rare in the evaporites. Zibelliite, that's the hairy stuff here on top of the hydroborosite. And my favorite, Folkovskite. Nice triclinic mineral. So they got a nice gallery, gorgeous minerals, make great micromounts. These ones all belong to the Canadian Museum of Nature, but you have to leave them there. Walkerite is one of the new minerals they found. And if you want detail on any of this locality, here's your reference. Grice et al., the Canadian mineralogist, 40 pages, 1675 to 1686. The Walkerite is the baseball bat here. And we go on to the last chapter, chapter 6, coming up. It's just a jump across the bay into the Jurassic from the Carboniferous. Here's Nova Scotia, and there's Parsborough, which is pretty famous among mineral collectors. Right here, once again, the Bay of Fundy here. Now, I'd like you to pay attention to this particular drawing. It was made by Ronnie Van Dommelen. And Ronnie is the person you want to talk to if you really want to know anything about the minerals in the Wasson Bluff area. One thing you should emphasize, though, if you want to be really technically correct, is it's not Wasson's Bluff. It's Wasson Bluff. There's no apostrophe S. People keep saying Wassons, but it isn't. It's just Wasson Bluff. So if you just bear in your mind Swan Creek, Wasson Bluff, and Clark Head, we'll come to those. In fact, if you start here at Clark Head and look over that way with your camera, what you get is a picture of Wasson Bluff from the tip of Clark Head. And Wasson Bluff doesn't look like much. That's an awful gluey mud flat at the moment between them. It doesn't stay muddy very long. When the tide comes in, that's a roaring mess, but it does. However, and this is why I was telling you to look at Willow before she left, that's her down there. So she's walking down here with Dr. Mossman, who's the one on the left. Looked at from here, it's a much more imposing bluff. There we are on the beach, and the high tide goes up to here, so you don't want to be caught down there on the beach. And that orange patch right there is significant. So pay attention to that orange patch. I'll come back to it later. Collecting is done, well, the minerals form between the basaltic blocks in the cliff walls. And the best time to collect them is right after a massive storm. It brings stuff down from the cliff and breaks it up on the beach, and you can collect there. And what does one collect? Well, calcite's one thing. You can get plain, ordinary, spiky scalene-hydrocalcite, or you can get calcite with enough faces to make it really interesting, such as that one. Gabazite, the standard stuff, ranges from colorless to dark orange. Perhaps the most significant features are not the fact there's gabazite, but the hillocks and other things that are found in penetration twins, all these steps in growth. I like this one because here we've got an Aztec pyramid, probably with a sacrificial altar at the top. And once again here, steps in growth are much more interesting than the mineral itself. Naturalite comes with the calcite. Chrysocolla on copper. There's copper wire under this grunge. And once again, I would dearly like to retake that picture. I can't find the specimen. And little heulandite over here, gabazite in the background. And one of the interesting things about the copper, and there's a lot of copper in this area, in these cliffs, there are copper mines in that area. You get tiny cuprite overgrowths on some of the wires that makes them shiny and red on the copper wires. That's chrysocolla in the background. The odd dendrite, probably a manganese oxide of one kind or another, sitting on an alcime. And if you go back to Clark Head, where we took that picture from in the beginning, they have epitote over there. And it's nice micromaterial. Near to Swan Creek, that's famous for its amethystine tinge in some of the quartz. There's very little amethystine tinge showing in that one, but it did come from the Quartz Creek end. Now, this is an interesting shoreline. It's on Partridge Island, which is right there in the Bay of Fundy in this particular section. And there's something remarkable about this, which you might not have thought of. Over here, you've got sandstone. And over there, you've got basalt. So it's just sandstone and basalt. Well, the interesting thing is that's the boundary between the Triassic and the Jurassic. The floor of the Bay of Fundy is Triassic. The exposed rocks in this area above are Jurassic. So Dr. Mossman, by the way, is writing an article on this particular occurrence where you have the two of them meet like that. Now, the red line I threw in, it could be nowhere near the actual boundary, probably angled one way or another, but this is the boundary between the Triassic and the Jurassic, which takes me back to that orange patch that we saw. There's an orange patch, and next to it is a white patch. The orange is river sediment. The white is lake sediment. And of course, you've got all this gray basaltic rubble up here, which is where the most of the minerals are. So if the minerals are in the basalt, why are we interested in the orange river sediment? And right at the end, there's a good reason for that. Here it is. This is the end. Actually, it could be the beginning, because those are the bones of a mammal-like reptile. That could be your great to the nth grandfather or grandmother, if you happen to feel that way. But it's probably somebody's ancestor way back then. And that is the end. If I can find my stop sharing, I will do that. Here we are.
That was excellent, Quintin. Thank you.
Not at all.
Excellent.
Quintin?
Very good, very good.
Quintin? Do we have questions for Quintin?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead, Jim.
Quentin, do you know what the current status is for George?
George Robinson?
Yes.
The last I heard, which was a couple of months ago, is that he's not doing all that well. He's lost the ability to hold his head up. And so he's had that for a while. His chin is tucked into his chest. But he's, mentally he's fine. It's the physical bit of the Parkinson's that's got to him. Yeah. But he has been quite sick
I
lately.
talked to Susan, I guess, about a year ago.
Yeah.
And at that point, he was still going out in the field with some firefighter or somebody like that she felt confident that he couldn't get hurt with.
Yeah. Now, I don't think he's been going out lately because he's been, I gather, quite sick, which is very unfortunate because there's one of the best curators in Canada, in North America, period. Yeah. But
Yeah.
these things do happen.
Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful presentation.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks.
Quintin, just on your inclusions in the Wologonite, that looked a little bit like strontianite in terms of the shape.
It's entirely possible. I mean, you get carbonates getting themselves all mixed up in these things, and it is entirely possible. In fact, over in St. Hilaire, on their side, you've got the Wologonite and the Donnyite, gay Donnyite, all growing on top of each other. So it could be. Will was back. So for those of you who looked at the cliff as we were walking on, that's how much the size shows on the cliff.
I'm sure a sitting pose is really very informative.
Well, you were sitting on a rock in one of the
Yes,
pictures.
anyway. Well, last I remember from Susan and George was still working on writing something.
Oh, yeah.
So his
Well,
mind is great.
Nothing wrong with his mind.
Yeah.
It's his physical ability that's the problem. Yeah.
Anyway,
I fully understand.
so
By the way, that's George Robinson we're talking about, the Dr. George Robinson, the one that I mentioned earlier on. Very nice gentleman.
Any other questions for Quintin? No?
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Was very
Quintin?
entertaining.
Quintin, are there, you know, the map you showed us right at the beginning, the southern edge of the lake there. How far off that map are the skarns in New York, northern New York State, that sort of thing? Are they quite a distance from there, or not?
Skarns?
Yeah, there's some skarns out further into further along, isn't there? Over to
They
the
would
west
have
of
to
there.
be, yeah. No, that's pretty solid nullstone down at that end too, the Silurian stuff. Yeah.
Okay.
You need to talk to Steve Chamberlain about that, though.
Yeah.
He's your expert
Yes.
on New York minerals.
Northern New York State.
Yeah. Come to the Rochester Symposium. Steve Chamberlain will tell you all about it.
I'd love to do
Actually, your skarns are way over towards Montreal. You're in the
Really?
Grenville. You're in the Grenville for the really interesting skarns.
Well, the ones in Ontario, yes. I don't know about the ones in New York.
Yeah,
But I
it's
imagine,
it's the Grenville skarns that
Yeah.
everybody
Yeah.
is so excited about around Gouverneur and so on.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah,
It's up in north of the Adirondack Mountains.
yeah.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. Well, the Precambrian stretches down through the Grenville province stretches down through New York, that area. But right where around the Niagara Falls bit where I was talking about, that's all the dolomitic limestone in there. Yeah.
I grew up in that area in Hamburg, just south of Buffalo.
Ah, yeah.
In fact, the Frontier Quarry was one of the first places I collected.
You didn't find that piece?
No, I saw somebody waste a really good specimen. He had a boulder that was probably 24 to 30 inches in diameter and had a nice pocket in it, lined with dolomite and calcite crystals. And then it had a nice water clear gypsum crystal covering the pocket. And instead of getting help to put that in his car to take home, he busted it up and ended up with just little pieces that were worth nothing.
Oh, dear. It happens. It happens. Yeah.
Everybody's going in with saws now into those quarries. They get permission and they go in with diamond saws so they can cut those pieces out to take.
Yeah.
And they're getting some incredibly large stuff at the moment from some of the ones in the Niagara area.
But of course, this is a Micromount club, so we don't care.
Oh, but there's nice micromounts on them.
He just need a bigger microscope.
Bigger box.
I think the most recent, excuse me, the most recent bout of mining at the Red Lead in Dundas in Tasmania for the crocodile was actually using the diamond chainsaws to extract specimens that obviously are very fragile with long crystals and so on. So yeah, it is becoming a lot more common. All right, any other questions for Quintin?
Yeah, Steve, refresh my memory. What's the next talk in 2 weeks?
It's going to be on the Lorien mines by Hank.
Okay,
Yeah.
Hank is going to do it? Okay, thanks.
I think he's going to do it, yes.
By the way, you should thank Steve Stewart there because he just sat through this talk twice.
I took notes on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah, Quintin gave it to the Micromountains of the Capillate area. Was that who it was?
No,
No, it was Leading Microscopical
in
Society.
Philadelphia. Yeah,
The Lighting Microscopical Society. That was
Yeah.
last week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
last Thursday.
And Hank,
But you,
Hank, you're muted, so we didn't hear what you actually said then. Which might be a good thing, I don't know. No, you're still muted.
Sound.
Muted.
Yeah. Turn the sound on.
Yeah.
Hey.
Sorry.
So you could have been very complimentary or maybe something totally opposite. Who knows?
Well, yeah, I was listening. I just wasn't talking.
All right. If there's no other questions, we'll fold this one up for now and come back in 2 weeks' time.
2 weeks.
Great. Thank you very much. Very good.
Thank you very much, Quintin.
Thanks, Quintin.
Thank you very much, Quintin.
Thank you, Quintin.
Thank you.
Keep
Bye.
safe, everybody. Keep safe.
Yeah.
And you.
Bye. Take
Indeed.
care.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Everybody.